I never thought my life would end up like this. Sitting alone in this cramped apartment that smells like the previous tenant's cigarettes, facing criminal charges and completely broke. But I need to tell someone the truth about what really happened, because everyone has it all wrong. They're painting me as some kind of villain when really I was just a woman trying to survive in a marriage that was slowly crushing my soul. It started 3 years ago when Theo and I were still happy, or at least I thought we were. I was struggling with my art career. Okay, fine. It wasn't really taking off the way I dreamed, and my student loans were piling up like some kind of financial avalanche. Every month, another payment I couldn't make, another call from some debt collector who didn't understand that real artists don't follow conventional timelines for success. Theo would sit there at our kitchen table with his laptop and his spreadsheets, making these little concerned noises while he looked at our bank statements. "Maria, we need to talk about your income situation," he said one evening, not even looking up from his screen. Just like that, like I was some kind of business problem he needed to solve. "The art classes aren't bringing in enough, and with your loans." He trailed off, but I knew exactly what he was thinking. He was thinking I was a failure. "I'm working on building my client base," I told him, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. "These things take time. Real art isn't like your corporate job, where you just show up and get a paycheck." He finally looked at me then, with that patient expression that made me want to scream. "I know, and I believe in your talent. But maybe you could consider getting something more stable while you build your art career? Just temporarily. There's that marketing position at the firm downtown. With your creative background, you'd be perfect for it." The way he said it, so reasonable and practical, made me feel like I was being unreasonable for wanting to pursue my passion. But what choice did I have? The bills weren't going to pay themselves, and Theo was already carrying most of our expenses. I agreed, but even as I nodded and said it made sense, I felt something bitter taking root in my chest. He was forcing me to give up on my dreams, even if he didn't see it that way. The marketing job was exactly as soul-crushing as I'd expected. Sitting in meetings about brand synergy and target demographics while my real artistic vision withered away in fluorescent-lit cubicles. But Theo seemed so relieved about our improved finances that I tried to make the best of it. At least until I discovered the art exhibitions. There's a local artists' showcase happening twice a month at the gallery downtown, I told him about 6 months into the job. I thought maybe I could start attending, network with other artists, stay connected to that world. His face lit up in a way it hadn't in months. "That's a great idea. You should absolutely do that. It's important to stay involved in what you're passionate about." Finally, something he supported without question. The exhibitions became my lifeline, 2 evenings a month where I could remember who I really was underneath the marketing professional costume I wore for everyone else. Theo would actually help me pick out outfits and ask about the artists I'd met. For a while, I thought maybe he did understand me after all. But understanding and truly seeing someone are different things, and I didn't realize how lonely I still felt until I met Carson. It was at a mixed media exhibition on a rainy Thursday evening. I was standing in front of this incredible piece, a sculpture made from discarded corporate materials, twisted into something beautiful and defiant, when someone behind me said, "It's like he's showing us what we could become if we stop letting them define us." I turned around, and there was this guy, maybe early 30s, with paint still under his fingernails and eyes that looked like they'd seen the same struggles I had. Carson. He wasn't traditionally handsome like Theo, but there was something magnetic about the way he talked about art, about life, about the courage it takes to stay true to yourself in a world that wants to box you in. "I'm Maria," I said, and when he smiled, I felt more seen than I had in months. "Carson, and I can tell you're an artist, not just someone who appreciates art. There's a difference in how you're looking at these pieces." We talked for 2 hours. About art, about dreams deferred, about how hard it is to maintain your authentic self when everyone around you is pushing you to be practical. He told me about his own struggles, how he'd refused to compromise his vision by getting a real job, how he was barely scraping by, but at least he was living honestly. When I mentioned my marketing job, the way his eyes filled with sympathy made my throat tight. "That must be so hard," he said. "Having all that creativity bottled up, spending your days making other people's visions come to life instead of your own." It was exactly what I'd been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate. Theo saw my job as a solution. Carson saw it as a tragedy. For the first time in months, I felt understood. I didn't tell Theo about Carson specifically that night. I just said I'd had good conversations with fellow artists, which was true enough. But I found myself thinking about Carson over the next few days, about his insights into the pieces we'd discussed, about the way he'd nodded when I talked about feeling trapped between financial necessity and artistic integrity. When the next exhibition came around 2 weeks later, I looked for him. And there he was, standing in front of a photography series about urban decay, looking thoughtful and a little sad. My heart did this stupid flutter thing when he saw me and smiled. "Maria, I was hoping you'd be here tonight." We fell into conversation even more easily than before. This time, we talked about our own work. I showed him photos of some paintings I'd done in college, and he told me about an installation piece he was planning that would critique corporate culture's impact on individual creativity. Everything he said resonated with me in a way that made me realize how much I'd been settling for surface-level conversations with Theo. "You know what?" Carson said as the exhibition was winding down. "These events are great, but they're so formal. There's this little coffee shop that stays open late on Elm Street. Would you want to continue this conversation somewhere more relaxed?" I should have said no. I should have gone home to Theo and our comfortable, practical life. Instead, I heard myself saying yes. The coffee shop was perfect. Dimly lit, filled with local artwork, the kind of place where you could talk for hours without anyone bothering you. And we did talk for hours, about everything. Carson told me about growing up in a family that didn't understand his artistic calling, about the loneliness of staying true to your vision when everyone thinks you're foolish. I told him about the marketing job, about feeling like I was betraying myself every day, about how Theo meant well, but didn't really understand what he'd asked me to sacrifice. "He sounds like a good guy," Carson said carefully. "But sometimes good isn't enough. Sometimes you need someone who really gets it." When I got home that night, Theo was already asleep. I stood in our bedroom doorway looking at him. Reliable, practical Theo, who paid the bills and fixed things when they broke, and never questioned whether there might be more to life than stability. He looked so peaceful, so sure of his place in the world. I envied that certainty, even as it made me feel more isolated than ever. Over the next month, I started telling Theo that the exhibitions had increased to weekly events. It wasn't exactly a lie. There were other art events happening around the city, and Carson always seemed to know about them. We'd meet at galleries, then drift to that coffee shop, or sometimes just walk around downtown talking about art and life and dreams. "You light up when you talk about your painting," Carson told me one evening. "It's beautiful to see. You must miss it so much, having to focus on marketing all day." I did miss it. I missed it so much that sometimes I felt like I was suffocating. And Carson was the only person who seemed to understand that, who didn't just tell me to be grateful for steady income or remind me about my responsibilities. He saw the cost of those responsibilities in a way Theo never had. It was Carson who suggested we meet somewhere more private. "These public places are great," he said, "but I feel like we're always watching the clock, always aware of other people around us. Wouldn't it be nice to just talk freely?" The seedy motel wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet and private and ours. We'd meet there once a week, sometimes twice, and for those few hours, I could pretend I was still the person I'd been before. Student loans and practical considerations had forced me into a life that felt like wearing someone else's clothes. At first, we really did just talk. Carson would bring sketches of his work, and I'd show him photos of paintings I'd done years ago. He'd massage my shoulders when I talked about particularly stressful days at work, and I'd listen while he shared his frustrations about trying to create meaningful art in a world that only valued commercial success. "Your husband doesn't know how lucky he is," Carson said one afternoon, his hands still on my shoulders. "To have someone with your depth, your sensitivity. When he kissed me, it felt like coming home to myself. I know how that sounds. I know what people think about women who cheat on their husbands, but they don't understand the context, the slow erosion of feeling unseen and unheard, the way Carson made me remember who I used to be before I got buried under expectations and practicality. Theo never suspected anything. He was so trusting, so focused on his own work, that when I told him about my weekly exhibitions, he just smiled and asked if I was making good connections. Sometimes his obliviousness frustrated me. Didn't he notice that I seemed happier on the days I saw Carson? Didn't he wonder why I was suddenly more interested in experimenting with my appearance? Why I'd started buying new clothes and wearing perfume to art events? But mostly, I was grateful for his lack of attention to detail. It made everything easier. Carson was struggling financially, really struggling. His art wasn't selling, and he refused to compromise his vision by taking commercial work. I started helping him out, little things at first. Paying for our coffee, covering the motel room, slipping him money for art supplies. It felt good to support a real artist, someone who was staying true to his calling despite the cost. "I hate taking money from you," he'd say, but I could see the relief in his eyes when I'd hand him cash for groceries or help with his rent. "You're not taking it," I'd tell him. "I'm investing in your art, in someone who actually understands what creativity means." It was so different from the way Theo approached money, always worried about budgets and savings and responsible financial planning. Carson appreciated my generosity, understood that money was just a tool to support what really mattered. For 3 months, I felt more alive than I had in years. I had my stable life with Theo, but I also had this secret world where I could be my authentic self with someone who truly understood me. Carson would tell me about his latest projects, his insights into the art world, his dreams for the future. He'd listen when I talked about feeling trapped in my marketing job, about the creative projects I wanted to pursue if I ever had the time and space. "You're too good for that corporate world," he'd tell me. "You deserve to be with someone who sees your real value." I started to believe him. Then I made the mistake that changed everything. I'd spent the afternoon with Carson at the motel. He'd been showing me sketches for a new series about economic inequality, and we'd talked about how my marketing job was actually perpetuating the kind of corporate culture his art was critiquing. It was one of those conversations that made me feel so understood, so validated in my frustrations with my daily life. When I got home, Theo was in the kitchen making dinner, something practical and healthy as always. He looked up when I came in, and his smile was so genuine, so happy to see me, that I felt a weird pang of something I didn't want to examine too closely. "Hey, how was the exhibition?" he asked, stirring whatever responsible vegetable dish he was preparing. "Meet anyone interesting?" "Actually, yes," I said, and here's where I made my fatal error. I was still thinking about Carson's reaction to a piece we'd discussed, still feeling validated and seen, and I wanted to share that feeling somehow. I actually sold one of my older paintings to someone there. That landscape I did in college, they offered me $300 for it. Theo's face lit up. "Maria, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you. Which painting was it exactly?" And that's when I realized I'd fucked up. Theo had this incredible memory for details, especially when it came to things that mattered to me. He remembered every painting I'd ever shown him, every story I'd told about my college art classes. He was going to ask follow-up questions I couldn't answer because the sale had never happened. "Oh, the one with the trees," I said vaguely, trying to change the subject. "It's not a big deal." But I could see him thinking, trying to place which painting I meant, and his expression was shifting from excitement to confusion. "The birch tree one from your sophomore year? Or the one you did at that workshop in Vermont?" "I don't remember exactly," I snapped, suddenly feeling cornered. "Does it matter? I made a sale. Isn't that what you wanted?" He looked hurt by my tone, and I felt terrible, but I was also panicked. I went to bed early that night, claiming I had a headache, but I could feel Theo's eyes on me, could sense him trying to figure out what felt off about our conversation. I should have known he'd investigate. Theo was methodical about everything: his work, our finances, even his hobbies. When something didn't add up, he couldn't let it go. I woke up the next morning to find him sitting at the kitchen table with my phone in his hands. "We need to talk," he said quietly. My blood turned to ice. I could see it in his face. He knew. Somehow he'd figured it out. "I know about Carson," he continued, his voice steady but strained. "I know about the city motel. I know there was no art sale yesterday." The next few minutes were a blur of accusations and tears and desperate explanations. I tried to tell him about feeling unsupported, about needing someone who understood my artistic nature, about how lonely I'd been in our marriage. But Theo just sat there, looking at me like I was a stranger. "I need some time to think," he said finally. I can't be here right now." "Where are you going?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "I don't know. But I can't look at you right now, Maria. I can't pretend this is something we can just talk through." He packed a bag and left that morning, and I didn't hear from him for a week. A whole week of calling and texting and getting nothing back. When he finally answered his phone, his voice was different, distant and formal, like he was talking to a business associate instead of his wife. "I want a divorce," he said without preamble. "Theo, please, let's just talk about this. Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." I tried everything. I cried, I apologized, I explained about feeling unsupported and misunderstood. I told him about the stress of the marketing job, about how Carson had just been someone who understood my artistic struggles. I begged him to come home so we could work things out in person. But Theo wouldn't even tell me where he was staying. "I'm not ready for that conversation," he kept saying. "My lawyer will be in touch." His lawyer. Like we were strangers instead of people who'd shared 3 years of marriage. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Theo wanted to split everything 50-50, which sounds fair until you realize that I was the one who'd made our house a home, who'd picked out the furniture and chosen the paint colors and created the atmosphere that made it worth living in. I'd invested my emotional labor in that space, but apparently that didn't count for anything in legal terms. I thought I could at least keep the house. I'd been the one to find it, after all, and I had so many memories tied up in those rooms. But Theo's lawyer was arguing that since he'd been the primary breadwinner, he should get a larger share of the assets. That's when Carson suggested we try a more direct approach. "He's being unreasonable," Carson said when I told him about Theo's refusal to even consider letting me keep the house. "Maybe he needs to understand how his selfishness is affecting you." We weren't planning to threaten him, exactly. We just wanted to have an honest conversation, to make him see how much pain his stubbornness was causing. Carson had found out where Theo was staying, with his friend Jordan, apparently, and we thought if we could catch him in person, maybe he'd be more willing to listen. It seemed like a good idea at the time. We got to Jordan's house early, before Theo left for work. I figured he'd be more receptive to conversation before he had to deal with the stress of his job. Carson was there for moral support, and honestly, I needed someone on my side for once. When Theo came out to his car, he looked shocked to see us. Not pleased, exactly, but shocked. "Maria? What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "You won't return my calls. You won't meet with me. What choice did I have?" "You had the choice to respect my boundaries," Theo said, and his voice had that cold, distant tone that made me want to scream. Carson stepped forward then. "Look, man, I get that you're hurt, but you're being unreasonable about the house situation. Maria deserves better than this." I could see Theo's jaw clench. "And you are?" "I'm someone who actually cares about Maria's well-being," Carson said, and I felt a rush of gratitude that someone was finally standing up for me. The conversation escalated quickly after that. Carson was trying to explain how Theo's rigid approach to the divorce was hurting me, and Theo was getting more and more angry. At one point, Carson grabbed Theo's shirt, not violently, just trying to make him listen, and said something about how Theo needed to be more flexible about the house situation if he didn't want things to get more complicated. I don't think either of us realized that Jordan had one of those doorbell cameras. The police showed up at my apartment 3 days later. Apparently, Carson's words about things getting complicated, combined with him grabbing Theo's shirt, constituted intimidation and conspiracy to commit assault. They arrested both of us, and suddenly I was facing criminal charges for trying to have a conversation with my own husband. The worst part was how everyone turned against me after that. My job fired me immediately. Apparently, being arrested for intimidation made me a liability to their corporate image. My own family started treating me like some kind of criminal instead of a woman who'd been pushed to desperation by an unforgiving husband and an unfair system. Even Carson turned on me when the police questioned us separately. Suddenly, the whole thing had been my idea, and he'd just been trying to help. Suddenly, I was the manipulative one who dragged him into my marital problems. The criminal charges meant the divorce proceedings got even worse. The judge saw the intimidation incident as evidence that I was unstable and potentially dangerous. Instead of getting half the house, I ended up with barely anything. Theo got the larger share of everything because of what the court called my threatening behavior. Now I'm sitting here in this terrible apartment, facing criminal charges that could result in jail time, completely broke from legal fees, and unable to find a new job because of my pending case. Everyone who used to support me has turned away, convinced that I'm some kind of villain instead of a woman who just wanted to be understood and appreciated. Carson won't even return my calls anymore. The man who used to tell me I deserved better, who understood my artistic soul, who saw how trapped I was in my practical life, gone the minute things got difficult for him. And Theo? Theo has moved on like our 3 years of marriage meant nothing. He's got his house, his job, his clean reputation, and his sense of moral superiority. Everyone sees him as the wronged party, the victim of a cheating wife who escalated to criminal behavior. But they don't know the whole story. They don't know about the years of feeling unsupported and misunderstood. They don't know about the slow suffocation of having to choose financial stability over artistic fulfillment. They don't know about the loneliness of being married to someone who saw your dreams as impractical hobbies rather than essential parts of who you are. I'm not saying I made perfect choices. I know the affair was wrong, and I know the confrontation at Jordan's house was a mistake, but I was desperate. I was a drowning woman trying to save herself, and everyone around me just watched me go under. Now they're all acting like my life falling apart is some kind of justice, like I deserve to lose everything because I made some bad decisions while I was struggling. Theo gets to be the hero of this story, the patient husband who supported his ungrateful wife until she betrayed him. And I'm the villain, the cheater who got what was coming to her. But that's not the whole truth. The truth is messier and more complicated, and it involves a lot of people failing each other in ways that don't make for neat moral narratives. I just wish someone could see that. I wish someone could understand that I didn't set out to hurt anyone. I was just trying to find a place where I could be myself, where I could feel valued for who I really was instead of who everyone else needed me to be. Instead, I'm facing the possibility of jail time. I'm completely broke, and I'm more alone than I've ever been in my life. And everyone thinks this is exactly what I deserve. Maybe they're right. Maybe this is what happens when you try to hold on to yourself in a world that wants to reshape you into something more convenient. But I still can't shake the feeling that if just one person had really seen me, really understood what I was going through, none of this would have happened. Now it's too late for any of that. The damage is done. The consequences are real, and I'm the only one left to face them. I just wanted someone to understand that I never meant for things to end up this way. I was just trying to survive, trying to find some small piece of happiness in a life that felt like it was slowly erasing who I really was. But I guess doesn't matter. All that matters is what I did, not why I did it. And what I did was destroy everything, including myself.